All right, if you could identify yourself for the purpose of Hansard, we will continue.
Great. Thank you and good afternoon.
It's MPP Forster's bill, so she had to leave.
Oh, so
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Shall I proceed?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Karl Baldauf, and I'm Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. In the last 3 months, I've had the privilege to visit some 40 communities across Ontario to discuss Bill 148. Many of those communities are represented by individuals around this table today. One image stays with me: a middle-aged woman, certainly unfamiliar with public speaking or advocacy, who owned a women's fashion store in downtown Sarnia. She stood up at a town hall convened by the local chamber there, clinching the microphone with tears in her eyes, and she said, "Do you think I make $15 an hour during the hard months?" But this is the truth behind Bill 148. This legislation, which professes fairness, will hurt the most vulnerable people in our society, the very people it intends to protect. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce and our members, who represent 135 communities across this province, from Toronto to Timmins to Cobeconk, we understand the intent of the legislation, but we also understand that evidence-based public policy must be fundamental in a properly functioning democracy. I acknowledge, and we are moved by the Premier when she points to individuals that work full-time in this province and who still must depend upon a food bank. That is unfair, and we must do more. And as chambers, we say that not only representing businesses, but as community organizations that count among our membership, charitable organizations, local agencies, colleges and universities, as well as local social justice groups. Now, I'm under no illusions that my words here today will compel any significant change, but my intent is to forewarn the members of this committee. We have done our work as a chamber to bring evidence into this conversation, and no doubt many of you will see the analysis conducted by CanSIA, not to mention other economic forecasts that have been done. In fact, there has not been a single economic modeling of Bill 148 that has not pointed to significant social harm. My intent is to speak directly to the issues of fairness, compassion, and Ontario's most vulnerable. Any objective analysis of this legislation has made the case for significant job loss, a 50% increase in inflation over and above what otherwise would be expected over the next few years, and an acceleration toward automation. This is bad public policy. It is too much, too fast. And there can be no justification for bad public policy. I've spoken to daycare owners who have indicated the price of daycare will rise exponentially as a result of Bill 148, this at a time when our government is trying to make daycare more affordable. I've spoken with retirement home operators who have indicated that safe and secure homes for our parents and grandparents, for Ontario seniors, is going to rise precipitously, this at a time when our government is trying to bolster retirement security. I've spoken with retail stores and restaurant franchises who have said that the cost burden placed on their stores will necessitate they fast-track to the introduction of automatic checkouts. I've spoken with charities and social service organizations who bemoan that in an environment where corporate profits are dwindling, so too will corporate giving. And many of us already know young people who have seen their hours cut. $15 an hour is only effective if you have a job. All these changes will manifest themselves in advance of the next provincial election. And so I caution those of you who are willing to hang your hats on bad public policy. The negative impacts of Bill 148 have already begun to reveal themselves, and I might say that process will increase with greater speed in the coming months. I'll close then with one comment. It is because we in the Chamber Network have compassion and are concerned with the most vulnerable people in our society that we oppose Bill 148. I would encourage those of you around this table to share in that compassion and protect our most vulnerable. Please propose wholesale changes to this legislation, adjust the timelines for implementation, and ensure that employers are well positioned to adjust to the new costs and social burdens that Bill 148 will bring. Thank you.
Since you just, are you prepared to go first, or do you want?
Time, if that's okay. Thank you for asking, Chair.
Okay. MPP Potts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Baldauf, for coming in. For coming in today and any comments. It's a question I ask small business all the time who tell me they're concerned about this bill. Do you believe that a business plan that is whose success is predicated on paying below poverty wages is appropriate, or should you rethink your business plan?
So what I think is appropriate is that if you're going to have the most significant increase in minimum wage in this province's history, a pace of change that we cannot find anywhere in the industrialized world, that you give businesses a timeline that is appropriate to transition to that. And I might say that the minimum wage change only represents half of the new cost burdens that businesses will have to deal with.
Maybe you've heard people after people in this room talk about the dire straits that low-income people are on right now.
Absolutely.
And they need this change right now. And so, you know, I'm concerned because I know that the work that the Chamber has been doing with a lot of Conservative members in this House, I mean, have you got some kind of a side deal with them? Are they promising you they're going to abandon and roll this all back if they get elected next time out?
So I think that line of questioning is absolutely inappropriate. The Chamber prides herself on working cooperatively with this government. In fact, it was only 2 weeks ago that we announced a program in cooperation with Minister of Small Business Jeff Leal, and we're proud to work cooperatively with this Liberal government. We meet with members of all parties, and so frankly I'm offended by this notion that we would be working cooperatively with one party to the exclusion of others.
Right,
we're very proud to work with members across party lines. And I might say that in all of the 40 town halls that we had with local chambers across Ontario, we invited sitting MPPs, and we encouraged our chambers to invite sitting MPPs to all of those events. And I was dismayed to not see more uptake by members, frankly across party lines, but especially by this government, because I think this government needs to hear those voices, and they have not
Well, you know,
heard them.
the experts that we're listening to, the dozens and dozens of economists who are saying that we're not going to see these kind of job losses that you're predicting, that in fact the economy is going to grow by something, I think we heard a number, $5 billion with all the additional revenues that putting into precarious people's hands so that they can expend that discretionary money at the end of the month when they paid for rent, paid for food, and that the economy will benefit. So you might see growth in the economy because there's more money circulating in the economy.
So with respect, those are speculative numbers. There is no organization that has done reasonable economic modeling on Bill 148 that has not pointed in the direction of there being job loss and increased inflation as a result of these changes. It is too much too fast. And so while you and this government may point to a letter that was provided by this government from economists back in July, many of whom don't live in Ontario, many of whom are on the payroll for the very unions that will benefit far more than the workers who they represent, those individuals have not actually done the economic modeling work to test what the impact will be. Those who have done the modeling, those who have done peer-reviewed modeling, have all said, we are looking forward to less people being employed than would have otherwise been employed. And that's the tragedy. The most vulnerable people in our society will be hurt as a result of Bill 148.
Thank you. We'll now move to the official opposition, MPP Yakubuski.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Karl, for joining us today. It's interesting that the member from the government side talked about a business plan predicated on poverty wages. Up until February of this year, the Premier was one of the leaders in defending that wage. So what changed? I mean, I could say to the members on the opposite side, a few months ago that was poverty wages. Now we're saying that businesses have predicated their business model on those wages. This was the government that actually legislated those wages. But all of a sudden the politics has changed. And I ask you, Karl, I mean, this is, we're not taking this out of the snatching it out of the air. We've heard from so many people, and you've touched today on the most vulnerable. When you talk to your members across the province of Ontario, how significant is the threat to vulnerable workers because of this? And nobody's arguing against the $15 an hour minimum wage, including your members. I do not believe I hear them talking about being opposed to $15 an hour. It's the speed at which it is being implemented. And how do you remember, how will it impact the most vulnerable?
Well, I pointed to the example of the small business owner in Sarnia, and that's just one of many stories that I've heard. What's actually been most revealing to me, and I did give this example, is of the charitable sector. I mean, the charitable sector in this province depends upon corporate donations. And you speak to small businesses, they say, I want to be a leader in my community, but I'll tell you the first thing that's going to go is my charitable donations. And you hear individuals in the social justice community say, well, this is because of corporate individuals that are trying to hold on to their profit. That's not it at all. Small businesses want to be beacons of hope to build out economic development in the local communities. That's why they get into business. That's why they get active in organizations like a Chamber of Commerce. And these individuals are terrified of what's going to come. They don't know how to accommodate this significant cost increase over the prescribed period of time. We asked our economists to model what would be the impact of doing one change if the government was to do nothing except for extend the timeline for implementation for the minimum wage piece, just the minimum wage piece. keep going with all the other aspects of this legislation, if you only extended the timeline for implementation of the minimum wage to 5 years, you would decrease the jobs at risk by 74%. So this is what I mean when we talk about evidence-based public policy. You know, there is a way to do this. There is a way to accomplish the goals and the intent of this legislation that is far more responsible. And I just wish that this government would listen to that. And I say, you know, this legislation is not passed yet, and I think there's still time for reflection upon that, because all of us want to build Ontario up. That's not something that any party has a monopoly on. But you do that by conducting yourself in a way that assesses evidence-based recommendations. I
see that you've already are alerting your members and have sent out a handbook about how to try to live under Bill 148. It's that much of a concern among your members.
This morning we had a webinar with 600 small businesses from across the province.
Thank you. We'll now move to the third party, MPP Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. So I welcome you here today, and you're Karl, the Vice President of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And so I just caught the tail end of your presentation, and I sense that, of course, you're very passionate about your position on Bill 148. And what I had heard was that you are not supporting Bill 148, but then you have kind of clarified that is it that one piece that bothers, that's the problem, the minimum wage? Is that the only thing that, under the Bill 148, that there's concerns around? And
no, I mean, there are many changes in Bill 148 that we're quite concerned about. If you look at the Labour Relations Act reforms that are being proposed, I mean, card check certification, many of our members see it as being anti-democratic because of the way it removes the secret ballot voting process from the rights of workers to decide, to be free from coercion from more intent members of their workplace that would want to have a union drive. They no longer can make their opinion known with the secrecy of a secret ballot, so we're very concerned about that. Personal emergency leave days. There is no province in Ontario, in Canada, that extends paid personal emergency leave days, with the exception of Prince Edward Island. And that's 1 day, and that's if you've been an employee for 5 years. And so now all employees across the province will have 2 paid personal emergency leave days. And the government is taking away the rights for employers to ask for a doctor's note. So, you know, there are many changes that concern us with Bill 148. I could go on. The scheduling changes, for example. I mean, there are many industries that depend upon building up on-call workers, and now those employers, if they cancel shift within 48 hours, will have to pay out 3 hours. Well, you know, you talk to many who understand that they are in a workplace that has many on-call workers, because that workplace has to scale up and scale down. And that's part of what they've signed up for, and being an employee of that organization. They know their employer will now default on hiring fewer people, having less people available, which may hinder the notion of growing and expanding their business or making their business available for fast orders. So, you know, all of these things together will have negative impacts on Ontario's economy, on economic development in this province. I mean, the minimum wage is the most obvious burden that's being placed on the province. And as I say, it's the pace of change more than anything. But there are many components to Bill 148 that concern us.
And is that all the members on the Ontario Chamber of Commerce feel that way, or do any other members that you have talked in favor of Bill 148?
So
is there any good in Bill 148 in your opinion?
Certainly, you know, there is never an issue where you will have total consensus. But what I will tell you is that in my time at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, there has never been an issue that has galvanized this much opposition. And I think you'll hear later from the Mississauga Board of Trade, one of our members, who would echo that. There is a significant amount of opposition amongst our network for Bill 148. And certainly, I've never been asked to come out to more communities to help individuals understand what will come from Bill 148. So there is a lot of interest, active interest, and certainly none of our members have said that we've gone too far in our opposition to Bill 148. Our members think that our opposition has been appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Baldauf, for your presentation. If you have a further written submission, it needs to be to the clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, November 3rd.
Thank you.
Thank you.